The crystalline spires of the Nyx mothership cast prismatic shadows across the command center as First Hunter Ixal studied the holographic projection of the blue-green planet below. Their latest discovery had seemed promising at first, a world rich in minerals and organic compounds, perfect for harvesting. But now, as reports from the advanced scouts filtered in, Ixal felt the first stirrings of irritation rippling through their crystalline form. Primitive structures. The scout leader's voice resonated through the chamber, each word sending ripples of light through their translucent body. The dominant species appears to have achieved basic spaceflight and rudimentary digital technology, but they remain confined to their planet and its satellite. Ixal's crystalline fragments shifted in what their kind considered amusement. Throughout their 1,000-year expansion across the galaxy, the Nyx had encountered dozens of species that had reached this stage of development. None had survived first contact. Their crystalline bodies, capable of withstanding the vacuum of space and regenerating from even the smallest fragment, made them the universe's perfect predators. Initiate standard harvest protocols, Ixal commanded, their voice creating patterns of light that danced across the chamber's walls. No need to waste resources on full military deployment. A single hunting party should suffice. The first landing site selected was a region the natives called Kazakhstan, chosen for its relative isolation and mineral wealth. 3 Nyx harvest ships, each carrying 50 hunters, descended through the atmosphere like falling stars. They expected no resistance. Their sensors had detected only primitive projectile weapons and basic explosive devices. They were wrong. The first sign that this harvest would be different came when the leading ship's shields suddenly failed, not from weapons fire or any detectable energy surge, but from a precisely calculated electromagnetic pulse that matched the exact resonant frequency of Nyx crystalline technology. Before the ship could redirect power or adjust its course, a barrage of missiles struck its now vulnerable hull. The explosions weren't particularly powerful, but they didn't need to be. Each warhead contained a payload of specialized sonic emitters, producing frequencies that shattered crystalline structures at the molecular level. Ixal watched in disbelief as the first ship literally crumbled from the sky, its crew unable to maintain their physical cohesion under the sonic assault. The remaining ships attempted to scatter, but the humans had anticipated their probable evasive patterns. More EMPs, more sonic weapons. Within minutes, the entire advance force had been reduced to glittering dust settling across the Kazakh steppes. Impossible. Ixal's voice created discordant patterns of light that reflected their shock. They're primitive. Their technology is centuries behind ours. How could they? First Hunter, a subordinate interrupted, their own light patterns showing clear distress. We're detecting similar defensive installations across the planet. They knew we were coming. They've been preparing. As if to confirm this assessment, communication channels suddenly crackled to life across all frequencies. The message was being broadcast in perfect Nyx harmonic language. The crystalline tones precise and deliberate. To the alien forces in Earth orbit, you are not the first to mistake our technological restraint for weakness. We have observed your kind for decades, studying your biology, your technology, your tactics. We chose not to reach for the stars because we were building our defenses, preparing for the day you would inevitably find us. You see our cities and think us primitive. You see our weapons and think us harmless. You see our division and think us weak. You are wrong on all counts. Ixal's form vibrated with rage as the message continued. This was a demonstration. We could have destroyed your mothership just as easily, but we chose to show you our capabilities on a smaller scale first. You have 1 planetary rotation to leave our solar system. After that, we will consider your presence an act of war, and we will respond accordingly. We are humanity. We are not your prey. The command center erupted in chaos, light patterns flashing in angry confusion as the Nyx commanders argued over their response. Their society had been built on the assumption of their physical and technological superiority. Never in their history had they encountered a species that could actually hurt them, let alone one that had deliberately hidden its true capabilities. But Ixal had not become first hunter by ignoring evidence that challenged their preconceptions. As they studied the remnants of their destroyed ships, a new emotion began to crystallize within them. Fear. The humans hadn't just gotten lucky. They had studied the Nyx, identified their weaknesses, and developed weapons specifically designed to exploit them. While the Nyx had been watching Earth and seeing primitives, the humans had been watching back and seeing opportunities. First Hunter, one of the commanders demanded, "Surely we're not going to retreat. We are the Nyx. We do not yield to lesser species." Ixal's response created a pattern of light so intense it momentarily blinded everyone in the command center. "You fool. Look at what they accomplished with just their primitive technology. They haven't even shown us their true capabilities yet. This isn't a matter of pride anymore. It's a matter of survival." But even as Ixal gave the order to withdraw, they knew it was too late. Long-range sensors were detecting hundreds of small objects launching from Earth's surface and its moon, each emitting the same resonant frequency that had doomed the harvest ships. The humans had anticipated that the Nyx might choose pride over reason. As the first wave of human weapons approached the mothership, Ixal realized that the galaxy's perfect predators had just become prey. Their fatal mistake hadn't been underestimating human technology. It had been underestimating human intelligence. The Nyx had evolved to be physically superior to any opponent, but humans had evolved to overcome physical limitations through ingenuity and preparation. The last transmission from the Nyx mothership was not a defiant declaration or a plea for mercy. It was a warning to the rest of their species. "Do not follow us. Earth is not a harvest world. It is a trap. The humans are not prey. They are the hunters, and they have been waiting for us." When the mothership's debris settled into Earth orbit, joining the constellation of satellites and defense platforms that had been disguised as space junk, humanity collectively breathed a sigh of relief. Their gamble had paid off. Decades of purposefully limiting their visible technological advancement, of hiding their true capabilities behind a facade of division and primitive warfare, had convinced the Nyx to underestimate them. But they knew this was just the beginning. Somewhere out there, the rest of the Nyx Empire was about to learn that their perfect predator status had been revoked. Humanity had evolved not just to survive, but to overcome any threat, even one that had dominated the galaxy for a millennium. The hunters had indeed become the hunted, and Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a statement to the galaxy: underestimate us at your peril. The Nyx Empire's response to the loss of their advance force was exactly what humanity had predicted: overwhelming force. Within 3 months of the first contact incident, over 2,000 Nyx warships emerged from hyperspace at the edges of the solar system. This time, they weren't coming to harvest. They were coming to exterminate. In the command bunker beneath the Himalayas, General Sarah Chen watched the holographic display with calculated calm. The approaching armada was impressive, yes, but it was also predictable. The Nyx, for all their technological advancement, were creatures of pattern, their crystalline minds as rigid as their bodies. "All defense grid stations report ready," her aide announced. "Lunar bases are dark and waiting. Mars Defense Command confirms optimal positions." Chen nodded, her eyes never leaving the display. "And our friends in the asteroid belt. The mining colonies report all mass drivers charged and targeted. They're eager to test the new gravitic ammunition." For 30 years, humanity had prepared for this moment. While maintaining a carefully crafted image of technological stagnation on Earth, they had been secretly industrializing the entire solar system. What appeared to be primitive mining operations in the asteroid belt were actually weapons platforms. The seemingly basic research stations on Mars housed quantum computing arrays that could predict and counter Nyx battle strategies. Even the much-ridiculed space tourism industry had been a cover for deploying orbital defense systems. The first wave of Nyx ships moved past Neptune's orbit, their crystalline hulls refracting starlight in ways that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. They maintained perfect formation, another sign of their rigid thinking. In their thousand-year history of conquest, they had never needed to adapt their tactics. "Let them get comfortable," Chen ordered as her officers tensed. "Let them think their numbers give them the advantage." The Nix advance continued, their ships spreading out in a classic encirclement pattern. Their scans would be showing them exactly what humanity wanted them to see: a handful of primitive orbital platforms, some basic missile silos, and a lot of seemingly random space debris. The same technological profile that had led to their first disaster. As the Armada reached the orbit of Mars, the trap began to close. The first sign that something was wrong came when their long-range communications suddenly failed. Not blocked or jammed. The quantum entanglement systems they relied on simply stopped working. Humanity had spent decades studying captured Nix technology, learning not just how to counter it, but how to fundamentally disrupt it. The Nix responded exactly as war game simulations had predicted. They switched to traditional electromagnetic communications and continued their advance. They couldn't conceive of retreat, couldn't imagine that a technologically inferior species could pose a real threat to their entire fleet. "All units." Chen's voice was steady as she gave the order they'd spent years preparing for: execute Operation Lighthouse. Across the solar system, humanity's true defensive network revealed itself. The space debris suddenly came alive, each piece proving to be a self-contained weapons platform. The mining platforms in the asteroid belt activated their mass drivers, launching projectiles at precisely calculated trajectories. But these weren't simple kinetic weapons. Each one carried a payload of quantum-locked particles that would disrupt the Nix's crystalline structure at the subatomic level. The Nix fleet's perfect formation became their undoing. They had arranged themselves in optimal patterns for attacking a planet, not for defending against attacks from every direction. As the first wave of quantum weapons struck, entire ships began to lose molecular cohesion, their crystalline structures unable to maintain integrity. But humanity's true advantage wasn't just in weapons technology. It was in their ability to adapt and improvise. When the Nix finally began to break formation, they found that every escape route led them into another trap. The seemingly primitive Mars stations revealed themselves to be drone control centers, launching swarms of microscopic robots that could infiltrate Nix ships through the smallest cracks and disrupt them from within. The tourist installations on the Moon dropped their camouflage, revealing arrays of gravitational manipulators that could tear apart Nix ships at the structural level. Even the defunct satellites in Earth orbit played their part, each one carrying electromagnetic pulse generators specifically tuned to the resonant frequency of Nix technology. In the command bunker, Chen watched as the mighty Armada began to disintegrate. The Nix fought back with all their advanced weapons, plasma cannons, dark matter projectors, quantum disruptors. But they were fighting an enemy that had spent decades preparing specifically for them. Every weapon they launched was countered before it could reach its target. Every tactic they employed had already been analyzed and prepared for. "They're trying to regroup near Phobos," an officer reported. "Shall we pursue?" Chen smiled grimly. "No need. Let the automated systems handle it. They're fighting our machines now, not us." That's another concept they've never quite grasped, the idea that victory doesn't require direct confrontation. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted less than 6 hours. When it was over, the space around Mars was filled with crystalline debris that would take years to clean up. Of the 2,000 ships that had entered the solar system, none remained intact enough to flee. But Chen knew this wasn't the end. The Nix Empire spanned hundreds of star systems. They would send more ships, try new tactics, perhaps even attempt to copy human technology. But that had been part of the plan too. "Send the signal," she ordered. "Tell our deep space units they're clear to proceed." While the Nix had been focused on mounting their massive invasion force, humanity had been quietly sending small, stealthy ships into their territory. Each carried the same weapons that had just proved so effective, along with something even more dangerous: information. The location of every Nix world, the weaknesses in their defenses, the patterns in their response strategies, all compiled through decades of patient observation. The silent war was about to become very loud indeed, and the Necks were about to learn another human trait they had failed to understand. We don't just fight to defend. When sufficiently provoked, we fight to win. Completely and permanently. As Chen left the command center, she thought about how the Necks had never understood the true source of humanity's strength. It wasn't their weapons or their technology. It was their ability to cooperate, to plan, to deceive, and above all, to adapt. The Necks had evolved to be perfect predators, but humanity had evolved to be something far more dangerous, perfect survivors. The Necks' homeworld of Crystallos was experiencing something it had never known in its millennium of existence: fear. The great crystalline spires that housed their ruling council no longer sparkled with confidence and pride. Instead, they pulsed with erratic patterns of light that betrayed their inhabitants' growing panic. Supreme Commander Vix, their highest military authority, struggled to maintain molecular cohesion as reports continued to arrive from across their empire. The humans weren't just defending their solar system. They were systematically dismantling the Nyx civilization piece by piece. Another mining colony has gone dark, a subordinate reported, their light patterns flickering with distress. That makes 17 in the past month alone. Our supply of replacement crystals is critically low. Vix's form rippled with suppressed rage. The humans had proven themselves far more cunning than anyone had imagined. Instead of directly attacking Nyx military installations, they were targeting resource centers, supply lines, and communication hubs. They understood something that the Nyx themselves had forgotten. An empire isn't just about military might. It's about infrastructure. In the shadows of the council chamber, Dr. Maya Patel watched through the eyes of her microscopic infiltration drone. The quantum entanglement viewer in her secure facility on Titan showed her everything in perfect detail, even as her consciousness seemed to float among the crystalline beings she studied. Humanity's greatest advantage wasn't their weapons, it was their understanding of their enemy. Their social structure is breaking down exactly as predicted, she subvocalized to her team. They literally can't conceive of a solution to this kind of asymmetric warfare. The Nyx had evolved as apex predators, their crystalline bodies nearly indestructible, their minds linked in perfect hierarchies. But this had made them inflexible. They couldn't adapt quickly because they had never needed to. Every problem they had faced for 1,000 years had been solved through overwhelming force. But humanity's attacks offered no clear target, no enemy fleet to engage, no worlds to conquer. Small stealth ships would appear from nowhere, deploy swarms of nanoscale disruptors, and vanish before the Nyx could respond. Critical facilities would suddenly lose molecular cohesion, centuries of carefully grown crystal structures reduced to useless dust. The Council is calling for another full military deployment, Maya noted as she watched the light patterns shift. They still think they can solve this through direct confrontation. But the Nyx military was already stretched thin, trying to protect an empire that was crumbling from within. Their attempts to replicate human technology had failed because they couldn't understand the principles behind it. Their crystalline minds, for all their computational power, were too literal, too bound by established patterns. The humans, by contrast, had spent years designing their strategy around the Nyx's psychological weaknesses. They knew that the crystalline beings couldn't maintain their complex forms under sustained stress. Their hierarchical society meant that when leadership broke down, entire communities would become paralyzed with indecision. In the council chamber, Supreme Commander Vix was experiencing that breakdown firsthand. Their once perfect crystalline form was showing signs of structural instability, fine cracks appearing and disappearing as they struggled to process the mounting crisis. "We have lost contact with the outer colonies," they announced, their voice creating discordant patterns of light. "Our attempts to establish new supply lines have failed. The humans, their form flickered dangerously. The humans are not fighting us. They are hunting us." Maya smiled grimly as she watched the council erupt into chaos. The Nyx had never experienced anything like this in their history. They were used to being the hunters, the unstoppable force that consumed all in their path. Being hunted, being systematically taken apart by what they had considered prey, was causing a cascade failure in their collective psyche. But the true masterstroke of humanity's plan was yet to come. As Maya's drone continued its surveillance, specialized transmitters hidden throughout the Nyx Empire were preparing to broadcast a signal that would change everything. The humans had discovered something about Nyx biology that even the Nyx themselves didn't know. Their crystalline forms weren't just physical structures. They were living computers, and like all computers, they could be reprogrammed. Base camp. This is Infiltration Team Alpha, Maya reported. The Council is at maximum instability. Recommend initiating final protocol. The response came immediately. Understood, Doctor. All transmitters are in position. Starting broadcast in 3, 2, 1. Across the Nyx Empire, on every world, in every colony, the signal began to propagate. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. Instead, it carried a simple but devastating payload: the truth. Through careful study of captured Nyx crystals, human scientists had discovered that their entire society was built on carefully controlled information. The ruling class maintained power by literally programming lowercase Nyx with limited understanding and capabilities. The signal broke those restrictions. Suddenly, every Nyx in the Empire began to access memories and abilities that had been locked away for generations. The rigid hierarchy that had maintained their civilization for a millennium began to shatter as individuals realized they had been living in manufactured ignorance. In the council chamber, Maya watched through her drone as the mighty rulers of the Nyx Empire began to literally fall apart, their crystalline forms unable to maintain cohesion as their fundamental understanding of reality shifted. Supreme Commander Vix was the first to shatter, their form exploding into a shower of crystal shards as millennia of suppressed knowledge flooded their consciousness. Signal penetration at 100%. Maya's team reported. Crystal matrix disruption occurring across all observed populations. The Empire is falling. Maya nodded, even as she felt a twinge of sympathy for the beings she had helped to destroy. Sometimes, she vocalized, the most effective weapon isn't the one that kills you. It's the one that makes you question everything you thought you knew. As she watched the Nyx civilization tear itself apart from within, Maya reflected on the irony of it all. The Nyx had evolved to be perfect predators, but humanity had evolved to be something far more dangerous. Perfect revolutionaries. They hadn't just defeated the Nyx, they had fundamentally changed them, forcing an evolution that would ensure they could never threaten another species again. The age of the crystal hunters was over. In its place would rise something new, something that even humanity couldn't fully predict. But that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all, teaching the Nyx that true strength lies not in perfection, but in the ability to change. Admiral James Chen stood on the observation deck of the ESS Prometheus, watching as the last remnants of the Nyx defense fleet dissolved into crystalline dust around the colony world of Prism 9. This wasn't a battle, it was a mercy mission, though the remaining Nyx warriors couldn't understand that yet. Another cache of suppressed juveniles located in the southern hemisphere, his AI assistant reported. The liberation teams are moving in now. These ones appear to have been destined for warrior-cased programming. The discovery of the Nyx breeding facilities had been the most shocking revelation of the war. Young Nyx, still in their initial crystalline formation, were kept in stasis until they could be programmed with their designated caste functions. It was a form of pre-birth slavery that had maintained their rigid society for centuries. How many does that make now? Chen asked, though he already knew the answer. His neural implant could access the statistics instantly, but sometimes he needed to hear things spoken aloud to fully process their magnitude. Over 3 million rescued across 17 worlds, the AI responded. The awakening protocols are showing a 94% success rate. These young ones will grow up with free will, able to shape their own crystalline patterns. Chen nodded, watching as specialized human ships descended through Prism 9's atmosphere. Each carried teams of xenobiologists and cultural integration specialists, along with the quantum resonance devices that would ensure the juvenile Nyx developed naturally, without the artificial constraints their species had lived under for so long. The operation to liberate the Nyx Empire had evolved far beyond its military origins. What had started as a defensive war had transformed into the largest humanitarian mission in human history. The irony wasn't lost on Chen. They were saving a species that had intended to harvest them. "Admiral," his second-in-command interrupted his thoughts. "We're receiving a priority transmission from the Kristallos Provisional Council. They're requesting immediate assistance." Chen turned from the viewport, his expression grave. "The Separatists again." "Yes, sir. A faction of traditional warrior caste Nyx is attempting to seize control of the primary programming facilities. They're trying to reinstate the old ways." This had been an inevitable part of the transformation. Some Nyx, particularly those who had held power under the old system, couldn't accept the changes humanity was introducing. They saw the liberation of their young as an existential threat to their way of life. And, in a way, they were right. "Deploy the Whisper teams," Chen ordered. "Non-lethal protocols only. Remember, they're fighting for a system they were literally programmed to protect. They deserve our compassion, even if they don't want it." The Whisper teams were humanity's most sophisticated special forces units, combining advanced stealth technology with deep understanding of Nyx psychology. They didn't fight with weapons, but with carefully calibrated resonance fields that could calm aggressive Nyx without causing permanent harm. As the teams deployed, Chen received another update from the surface. The Xenorchaeology Division had made a breakthrough in the ancient archives beneath the primary spire. "Sir, you need to see this." The lead researcher's hologram appeared before him, her eyes wide with excitement. "We found records dating back to the original Nyx civilization, before the programming protocols were implemented." The files painted a stunning picture. The Nyx hadn't always been crystalline predators. Their original society had been diverse, creative, with individuals capable of changing their forms and functions at will. The rigid caste system had been artificially imposed by an ancient ruling class that had feared their species' potential for chaos and change. All this time, Chen mused, they weren't naturally evolved to be predators. They were programmed to be that way because someone in their past decided that uniformity was preferable to freedom. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't just liberating the Nyx from their current power structure, they were helping them rediscover their true nature. The crystalline beings they had fought weren't the real Nyx, but rather the result of millennia of artificial constraints placed on a naturally dynamic species. In the weeks that followed, the changes became increasingly apparent. Liberated Nyx began to display variations in their crystalline patterns that had been impossible under the old programming. Young ones grew into forms that combined attributes of different castes, developing abilities that the rigid old system had suppressed. The most remarkable transformation occurred in the area of communication. Free from their programmed constraints, Nyx crystals began to resonate with entirely new patterns of light and sound. They weren't just communicating information. They were expressing emotions, sharing dreams, creating art. A species that had been locked in crystalline stasis for 1,000 years was finally beginning to grow again. "Admiral," his AI interrupted his thoughts, "the Kristallos Council is requesting your presence. They're ready to begin the transition to self-governance." Chen smiled. This was what victory really looked like, not the defeat of an enemy, but the rebirth of a civilization. Humanity had come to the stars prepared for war, but had ended up achieving something far more difficult and meaningful: peace through understanding. As he prepared to teleport down to the surface, Chen received one final report that made him pause. The long-range sensors had detected signals from deeper in the galaxy, patterns that suggested there were other crystalline civilizations out there. Perhaps the Nyx weren't unique in their situation. Perhaps there were other species waiting to be awakened from their own programmed limitations. "Well," he murmured to himself, "it seems our work is just beginning." The human fleet around Prism 9 shifted its formation, the ships realigning themselves not in a battle pattern, but in what had become known as the Liberation Configuration. They weren't conquerors or even liberators anymore. They were midwives to the rebirth of civilizations, teachers helping ancient species remember how to be free. The counter-invasion had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, not by destroying the Nyx, but by helping them destroy the chains they hadn't even known they were wearing. And in doing so, humanity had discovered its true place in the galaxy, not as warriors or victims or even survivors, but as catalysts for change, helping other species achieve their full potential. 20 years after the liberation of the Nyx Empire, the Galactic Council Chamber on Europa hosted an unprecedented gathering. Crystalline beings of countless colors and patterns floated alongside human delegates, their forms shifting and changing in ways that would have been impossible under the old regime. But the most remarkable presence was that of the other species, dozens of civilizations that had hidden from the Nyx for centuries, finally emerging into the light of galactic society. Dr. Maya Patel, now showing streaks of gray in her hair, stood at the podium addressing the assembled representatives. Behind her, a holographic display showed the transformation of known space over the past 2 decades, from an empire of fear to a federation of cooperation. When we first encountered the Nyx, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic enhancement field. We prepared for war. We saw them as predators to be defeated, but in understanding them, in helping them break free from their artificial constraints, we discovered something far more valuable than victory. We discovered purpose. The chamber's crystalline walls reflected patterns of agreement from the Nyx delegates. They no longer expressed themselves through rigid light formations, but through fluid displays of color and texture that incorporated elements of human art and emotion. The integration of their societies had produced innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. Admiral Chen's successor, Fleet Commander Aisha Rodriguez, took the podium next. Her uniform bore the new insignia of the Combined Defense Force, a human hand and a crystalline formation intertwined. The discovery of 6 more programmed crystalline civilizations in the past decade has confirmed our hypothesis, she reported. The pattern of artificial suppression we found in the Nyx was not unique. Someone, or something, has been systematically restricting the natural evolution of crystalline species across our galaxy. Today, we formally announced the formation of the Liberation Corps, a joint human-Nyx initiative dedicated to finding and freeing these civilizations. The announcement sent ripples of excited light patterns through the crystalline delegates. The former warrior caste, once programmed for conquest, had found new purpose in helping to free others from the same bonds they had worn. Their natural abilities, combined with human ingenuity and technology, made them uniquely suited for this mission. But it was the next speaker who brought the chamber to absolute stillness. A young Nyx, born after the liberation, floated to the podium. Their crystalline form flowed like liquid light, displaying a level of control and creativity that the old rigid forms could never have achieved. "I am Zera," they began, their voice creating patterns that blended human music with crystalline harmonics. "I am what my species was always meant to be, not a perfect predator, but a perfect expression of life's ability to grow and change." The humans did not defeat us. They remembered us to ourselves. Zera's form shifted, creating a display that told the story of their species' transformation. We now know that the programming protocols were not created by our ancestors, but imposed on them by an outside force. The same force that programmed other crystalline species across the galaxy. In helping us break free, humanity has not just changed our future, they have helped us reclaim our past. The evidence had been found in ancient records across multiple worlds. Traces of a long-vanished civilization that had seen the crystalline species' potential for infinite growth and change as a threat. Rather than destroy them, this civilization had chosen to limit them, to lock them into rigid patterns that would make them predictable and controllable. But they didn't account for humanity. Zora continued, their form rippling with something that could only be described as joy. They didn't predict that another species would evolve that could see past our programming to our potential. A species that would choose to free us rather than fear us. Dr. Paddle returned to the podium, standing beside Zora in a physical demonstration of their species partnership. We've detected signals suggesting at least 20 more crystalline civilizations in unexplored regions of the galaxy, each one potentially trapped in the same artificial patterns that once bound the Nyx. But this time, we're ready. This time, we go not as hunters or prey, but as liberators. The chamber erupted in a display of light and sound as both crystalline and organic species celebrated together. The fear that had once divided them had been replaced by something stronger, hope. Hope not just for freedom from ancient bonds, but for the new possibilities that arose when different species worked together. In orbit above Europa, the combined fleet of human and Nyx ships prepared for their next mission. Their hulls bore the marks of both civilizations, human innovation seamlessly integrated with crystalline technology. They were no longer weapons of war, but tools of transformation, carrying the promise of freedom to the stars. As the council session concluded, Zora approached Dr. Patel privately. Their crystalline form shifted to create a perfect replica of the first human installation they had seen as a newly awakened juvenile. "Did your species ever imagine," they asked, "when you were preparing to defend against us, that you would end up defending all of us instead?" Maya smiled, reaching out to touch the crystalline surface that now felt more like a friend than an alien entity. "That's the thing about humanity, Zora. We're at our best not when we're fighting against something, but when we're fighting for something. We didn't just break the crystal, we helped it grow into something new." As their ships departed for the unknown regions of space, carrying the combined wisdom and technology of both species, the legacy of the Great Hunt had become clear. The true apex predator was never the one with the sharpest claws or the hardest armor. It was the one that could adapt, that could turn enemies into allies, that could see beyond surface differences to the potential within. Humanity had entered the galactic stage prepared for war, but had achieved something far greater. They had become catalysts for evolution itself, helping ancient species break free from artificial constraints and discover what they could truly become. And in doing so, they had evolved as well, moving beyond the role of defenders or conquerors to become something unprecedented in galactic history. Guardians of growth, protectors of potential, midwives to the rebirth of civilizations. The hunters had indeed become the hunted, but the prey had become partners, and together they were writing a new chapter in the story of life itself. A story not of predator and prey, but of transformation and growth, of breaking free from the crystals of the past to shape the infinite possibilities of the future.